Hello everyone and welcome back to Rick's Garage. You may have heard the old rule that brake rotors and pads have to be replaced together, but is that a universal truth? Stay tuned because the answer might surprise you.
Say hello to the bad side. My emotion is flatline. Hungry demon, what I'm seeing is snack time. When I rush in the grab, I better run from the path line.
Brakes are one of the most important systems on your vehicle. Whether it's a car, truck, or motorcycle, a driver has to be able to bring that hunk of iron to a safe stop. Because of this importance, if you're new to cars and you want to try this job yourself, I'm going to give you a few tips to make the job easier and most importantly safer. But if you're still not sure you want to tackle something this big, trust the job to a local professional, not some guy on YouTube. Like I said, brakes are important. If you mess them up, brakes aren't working. I showed you guys back in episode 31 how involved a full brake rebuild can be on a project, but thankfully maintenance on a daily driver isn't usually that intensive. Today's example is my wife's 2013 Ford C-Max. Now we bought the car used, so I'm not sure exactly how long ago the brakes were serviced, but a quick visual inspection showed me that it's time. Now, there's going to be a few steps to this job specific to this vehicle, but most modern cars have four-wheel disc brakes, so the approach is exactly the same. The first step is to get the car in the air. Check your owner's manual to see if your vehicle has a central jack point, but otherwise pick something solid like an engine mount or under a ball joint to lift from.
Wait a minute. Under a ball joint? Why doesn't this dummy just lift the car from the pinch rail the way the factory designed it?
Excellent question. The strength and jack points are where I'm going to be placing my stands. Unless it's a roadside emergency, never work on your vehicle while it's resting on a jack. If it fails or loses balance, you're going to be in some trouble. The front pads definitely have to go, so to get started, let's remove the tension springs on the caliper. There's a few of them on here, so a good tip is to only take apart one side of the vehicle at a time. That way you have a visual example if you happen to forget how it goes back together, because hey, it happens. Next we'll need to release the tension on the rotor. There are specialty tools for this, but I've had success using a larger Bessie or a C-clamp. In a pinch, you can use a small pry bar to compress the caliper, but it's not really good practice. Then just remove the two caliper slider bolts and remove it from the brake pad frame. Now it's very important to support the weight of the caliper because it could damage the brake hose if it hangs freely. Speaking of the hoses, be sure to give them a good once over to check for cracks in the rubber or signs of leaks. If you need to replace a caliper or brake hose, check out episode 9 for more details. So now we're at the heart of the question, do rotors and pads have to be replaced together? You used to be able to get rotors resurfaced for a fraction of the price of a new set, but nowadays, depending on where you live, you might be hard-pressed finding a place that still turns rotors. And then there's figuring out how to get them to the shop while your car's taken apart. The good news is that there are 3 easy things you can check to see if your rotors can be reused. The first is thickness. A pair of cheap calipers will tell you if the rotor you have is thick enough to use safely. Be sure to look up the spec for your vehicle because they're all a little different. The second check is surface condition. Deep grooves or patches of discoloration are definitely going to cause trouble down the road. Not only will they wear the new brake pads faster than normal, they may actually prevent the new brakes from working correctly. And finally, take a look at the overall condition. If there are rusted bits falling off or you're feeling a weird vibration in the brake pedal, it's time for some fresh parts. If all these things check out, there's no reason that you can't get some more kilometers out of those discs and save yourself some money. If the rotor's good to go, I like to give them a very light surface scuff and wipe them down with some brake cleaner. Now for the brake pads. It's very important to avoid touching the friction surfaces. Dirty fingerprints can contaminate the material and your brakes might not work properly. To make sure everything moves correctly, a good practice is to use some brake lubricant on all the surfaces where the new pads are going to slide. The last step here in front is to reinstall the caliper. We'll need some more room to fit the new, thicker brake pad, so the piston needs to be compressed some more. That same clamp from before will work, or some wide mouth vice grips will do the trick too. After the caliper is mounted, use some brake lube on the slider bolts and torque everything to spec. Since they're also discs, the rear brakes come apart basically the same way as the front. Depending on your climate, there's a good chance the rotor will be rusted to the hub. Use some penetrating oil, and if you have to use a hammer, strike the rotor hat between the wheel studs and try to avoid hitting the disc face if you're reusing them. New brake rotors will have an anti-corrosion coating that can be easily removed with some brake cleaner and a shop towel. Make sure you get it all because it can easily contaminate the brake pads, and you know what happens then. The rear brake assembly goes back together pretty much the same as the front with one exception. As part of the handbrake mechanism, resetting the rear caliper piston is a little different. Instead of compressing the piston straight back in like the front, the rear calipers have to be wound in. Make sure you remember the difference or you're going to end up breaking something. There's an inexpensive tool that you can use that locks into the face of the piston, allowing you to rotate it with a ratchet and extension. Once the piston is reset, the sliders are lubed and the caliper gets bolted back on the frame. The last check is the condition of your brake fluid. The reservoir is located under the hood, right in front of the brake pedal. A shade of yellow is okay, but when you start getting into the browns, it's time to change it. And that's about it. You've now serviced your brakes. Before you drive your vehicle, make sure the brake reservoir is sealed, start the engine and pump the brake pedal a few times until it feels firm. This very important step seats the new pads and restores pressure to the lines. If you forget to do this, you run the risk of... you get it. I hope you found today's video helpful, and if you have, let me know by dropping a like and a comment. And while you're here, subscribe with notifications so you never miss any of my new content. I'm Rick the Welder, and as always, thank you all very much for watching.